Alright, you guys, so we left off over here in the last video with this paragraph over here, and with the help of heaven now we will continue with the next. Alright, so when I realized what reasons scripture and tradition had called for the duties of the heart, I began to train my soul in them. And took upon myself the task of studying them and practicing them. The discovery of one matter relating to these duties always led me to the discovery of another, and that one yet to another, until the subject became very broad. It became difficult for me to remember it all by heart, and I was afraid I would forget that I had learned them, and that the ideas that I had developed on the subject would unravel in my mind. Given the little help that was available from contemporaries, I decided to write them down in a work which would include their basic principles, main chapters, and particular applications, so that I might expect of myself always to know them, and bring to myself to perform them. When I find that my personal conduct is consistent with what I have written of these duties, I will thank the Almighty, who helps me with them and guides me in their paths. When I find that it is inconsistent with or falls short of what I have written, I will hold myself responsible and be self-critical with my book as my yardstick, bearing in mind the standard of conduct that is described in the book. I will be able to distinguish between its nobility and my own meanness, its straight path and my own deviations, its perfection and my own distortions, its wholeness and my own inadequacies. I wanted to put the subject down in an enduring form, to make of it a protected treasure, a light that would illuminate men's paths and show them the way on which they must travel. My hope was that it would be of use to others even more than to myself. Hold on. Even more than to myself, that it would serve as a guide to others, and even more than meeting my own needs. I said to myself, I would write a book on the subject, which would be arranged according to the foundations of the duties of the heart and the inner life. It would be a comprehensive work covering all topics sufficiently. It would point out the good and straight path, and guide one in the ways of the early ones, and in the discipline of the pious. It would wake up those who slumber in foolishness, delve deeply into the nuances of the science, and remind one of the knowledge of God and His teachings. It would help one recover one's spirit. It would spur on the observant and stir up the indifferent. It would set straight the reckless, train the tardy, bolster the beginner, and show the way to those who are perplexed. When I considered acting on my decision to write the book, I realized that a man like myself was unworthy of authoring such a work. I thought my powers to be too limited. And my mind too weak to grasp the ideas. Furthermore, I do not possess an elegant style in Arabic, which this book was originally written in, and then it was translated to Hebrew, and then it was translated to English, which is great, which is like wow, in a good way, which is like unbelievable. It's like amazing in a way, so to say. It might sound like it's like we were saying it's bad or something, like saying it's crazy, unbelievable, but really no, we were saying the opposite. It's amazing, right? This is wondrous that it was translated so many so many times from one language to the next, furthermore, I do not possess an elegant style in Arabic in which the book would have to be written, as it is the language which is understood by the majority of my contemporaries. I feared that it would be undertaking as a task which would succeed only in exposing my own shortcomings, and that I would be exceeding the bounds of discretion. Therefore, I resolved to drop my plans and call off my decision. After resolving not to assume this heavy burden, but to give up the project, I began to suspect that I had taken the easy way out, that I had been lazy, looking for peace and quiet. I feared that what had motivated the cancellation of the project had been the desire for self-gratification, which had driven me to seek ease and comfort, to opt for inactivity and sit idly by. I knew that quite a few intellectual achievements had been perverted by fears, and that many failings were the result of self-doubt. I remember the saying, part of caution is to not be too cautious. I told myself that if anyone who intended to perform some good act or to teach what is right and virtuous kept silent, probably what he means by this part of cautious is not to be too cautious is like, probably it's like where it says like that person that we shouldn't be overly righteous. It says that person should not be tzaddik harbe, not too righteous. Like the way I heard it was like Esav, he asked about staka on salt. Like it's not, the way I heard it was that we shouldn't ask, we shouldn't try to make, we shouldn't try to we shouldn't try to be overly righteous in something that's so small as, like, how to say, salt. It's like certain stuff we like if we're writing a book, we shouldn't stop. That's how I understand it. However, if you disagree or have another interpretation or understanding, please write it down in the comments. The person should be cautious not to be too cautious, right? I told myself that if anyone who intends to perform some good act or to teach right and virtuous kept if everyone who intended to perform some good act or to teach what is right and virtuous kept silent and stood still until he felt perfectly qualified, not a word would have been spoken by any man since the prophets, whom God has chosen as his messengers and strengthened with his support. If everybody who wanted to perfect himself with all the best qualities and was unable to attain them all, were then to forsake those qualities which he had managed to attain, all men would be empty of virtue and deficient in what is admirable. We would all be racing after false hopes. The path of virtue would be desolate, the dwelling places of kindness deserted. I realized further that a man has a powerful drive to obtain what is the height of evil. He tends to be negligent in the pursuit of kindness, lax in seeking the good. He is drawn to frivolity and amusement. If a vision of lust appears to him and beckons to him, he fabricates a false rationale to follow it. He then brings up supports for its claims in order to strengthen its case and patch up its inconsistent reasoning, all to justify his behavior. If, however, the light of truth appears to him and beckons to him, he fabricates untruths to avoid following it. He argues against it, distorts its case, and contradicts its claims, in order to tear apart its consistent reasoning and part ways with it. Every man has an enemy within him, unless he has help from God, an ever-present corrective guide for his soul, and the self-mastery to bind it with the bridle of service, control it with the reins of virtue, and strike it with the rod of discipline, so that when the performance of some good act occurs to him, he will not delay. And ever present in the self-mastery to bind it with the bridle of service, control with the reins of virtue, and strike it with the rod of discipline, so that when the performance of some good occurs to him, he will not delay. And if his heart entices him to do otherwise, he will berate it and overcome it. I have therefore seen fit to force myself to assume the heavy burden of writing this book to explain the subject with whatever language I can muster, whatever expressions that come to me, so long as the meaning is conveyed. I will mention those details of the duties of the heart that suggest themselves to me, but will not trouble to cite all of them. To do so would make the book too lengthy. I will mention, however, what is necessary for the understanding of the major principles, each one in its own gate. I seek the help of the one and true God. In him do I trust. I ask that in his mercy he show me the straight path which pleases him and finds favor in his eyes, in word and deed, in the inward life and in outward action. Finally, When I finally decided to write this book, I laid out its foundations, established its basis, and built it around 10 major principles which contain all the duties of the heart. I divided the book into 10 gates. Each gate is devoted to one of the major principles and discusses its scope, main divisions, offshoots, and the things which are harmful to it. I've written the book in the style most suited for awakening, guiding, and enlightening the reader in clear, easy, and common language, so that what I have to say may be readily understood. I have avoided esoteric language, the use of unusual terms, polemical argumentation, and obscure investigations. Beyond the scope of this book, I've used rather only those arguments which are sufficient and which satisfy the mind, following the theological method. As the philosopher said, we should not seek in every subject of inquiry irrefutable proof, for not every intellectual inquiry leads itself to such proof. In mathematics, we should not settle for probability. In theology, we should not expect to apprehend with the senses or draw a comparison with the physical world, and we should not seek proof of first principles of physics and demonstration. So that applies, like we said, only to the other commandments and not dealing with the prophecy or the unit or the commandment of the unity of God. Otherwise, the what's that thing called? The proving the kind of the rationale, the rationalization, and the kind of deduction, so to say, the deducement of our obligation to our obligations, the deducement of the reasons of our obligations from the commandments that aren't the duties of the unity of God. We should kind of come to our own realization of why we have to serve God and stuff like that, and how it's important. That we should deduce. However, we shouldn't be deducing anything in the unity of God or the prophecy, because that is completely above comprehension and off limits with the thinking with the brain. Certain things we have to kind of learn from the prophets, from the school of prophecy, right? Because like as we heard, I heard this from Rabbi Gadayev online. You could check him out. That he said that the prophets had a school. They actually had a school of prophecy. So check out for sure L'Shem. That's their channel, L'Shem online, and he's doing Sharei Ora, by the way. So that's Kabbalah, for example, and that's where it's not. I don't know if he talks about the unity, the gate of unity over there, but he does explain the attributes, for sure, over there in the Shari Ora. So check it out for sure. However, we just want to make this disclaimer. We just want to keep always making this disclaimer when we're reading this book, just to not forget. Avoiding these facilities avoiding these things facilitates our purpose. If we fail to avoid them, we stray away from our purpose, and it becomes difficult to reach our intended goal. Because this is a book on theology, I have avoided the method of argument used in logic and mathematics, and an exception, however, the first gate, where because of the subtlety of the analysis, I was forced to resort it. Most of my arguments appeal to reason, and I try to make them accessible to the reader by offering exact analogies. I support my arguments with references to scripture and with the words of our masters of blessed memory that have been passed down to us. I also quote the pious and wise men of the other nations whose words have reached us, such as the words of the philosophers, the discipline of the ascetics, and the admirable codes of conduct. For it is my hope that my reader will incline their hearts to them and listen to their wisdom. Our masters of blessed memory have already said. One verse says, "But you have acted in accordance with the laws of the nations around you." And another verse said, "Nor have you acted in accordance with the laws of the nations around you." What is the resolution of the two verses? You have not acted like with the laws of the nations around you. What is the resolution of the two verses? You have not acted like the refined among them, but you have acted like the corrupt among them. Anyone speaks wisdom, even if he's among the nations of the world, is called a wise man. So, like I had a teacher. He said, if they tell you yesh chochmas bagoim ta'amin, if you hear that if the nations have wisdom, believe it. But we shouldn't listen to them in the Torah, right? In the Torah. So if that's the thing where the way I understand is like the gate of unity. We're not gonna listen that from the nations because that's a specific way that we have to learn it from the words of prophecy. And we won't learn the what's it called? We won't learn the how to do prophecy from the nations, also because that's something that's from the prophets, specifically from our tradition, right? So we have to learn about the books and read the books more deeply that explain that part, and that what we could find in the Zohar and Arizal's book. So, however, the other stuff, if they tell us that there's wisdom among nations, we have to believe them because it's true. They have a lot of wisdom behind them. And even we see the nations that Aristotle, he knew about Kal v'chomer, he knew about Chazakah, right? So, but we won't really, but we still don't go into them. We don't go into learning them, really, because the way I was told when I first started learning about Torah and religion, excuse me, more than originally, was I asked this one rabbi and he said, I asked him, is it okay to learn all the other like religions and stuff like that? And he said, absolutely not, right? He said, not absolutely not. Until you learn your own religion, you cannot learn a different one. First learn your own, and then after you learn your own, you'll learn everything else. Right? So, we'll with the help of heaven, we'll learn everything. We'll have to learn everything anyway, because it says we should be able to answer a heretic, right? So, but the truth is, I'll tell you guys, the more we learn about our religion, the more we know by default the other ones. And to tell you the truth, from my experience, I've been learning. You guys listening to a person who's just been sticking with one religion, just learning the Judaism, and to be telling you the truth, honestly, this guy who you guys are listening to, like, was able to learn a lot about all the other religions just because learning one, because you just by default will hear it. You will by default hear the different religions and philosophies or whatever, everything that's false. You're gonna by default, like he says earlier in the thing, anytime you have something truthful, by default you're gonna the evil side is just always gonna say, oh, but what about this, what about that, da, da, da. You by default, we by default hear the stuff. That's why you have to know that's when we learn. We actually by default kind of, when we stick to our religion, we by default learn how to answer the bad side, the evil side, not to follow the bad side, right? God forbid. And that's what's the power of our holy works, of our holy Torah, that was written by God, and copied down, written down by Moses, a prophet, and passed down to us by generations. Right? Because they say that God was the one who wrote, who for 200. They say he was. The way I remember is that for 200 years he created the letters, and he was looking into the letters and kind of looking at the deepness and the hidden mysteries behind them. For 200 years he was just he was like making words and stuff like that, and explaining explaining different things, and every single word, and this says in the Zohar, every letter came to him and said, Master of the universe, please create the world with me, and it would tell him that this is why you should, and he would say, you are like, you're worthy, you're truthful, you're worthy, and stuff like that. However, like, we cannot do it with you, or something like that. We can do it with you, and eventually he gets to and some of them, he said that you just have to be in a different place, and at the end he finally gets to the base, right? Because I believe what he said is because it starts with baracha, which means blessing, right? So it's very interesting. He the way how the wisdom kind of goes down, how we actually get the revelation from Mount Sinai. And so Moses, they say, and I believe it's in the Ramban, he says that Moses wrote down the Torah like a scribe looking over from one side to the other. So it's very, very amazing. Okay. However, just to get back to the topic, the nations have wisdom. We can listen to what we learn from here. From what we're allowed to learn, and then what we should learn, And if they tell us that the nations have wisdom, we have to believe it because it's true. However, if they say they have Torah, we cannot believe it, right? Because they don't know. They don't know the way to interpret it. Only we know if we have the tradition, right? How can they know? Regarding the practice of bringing analogies to explain difficult subjects, they have said he Kohelet taught it with mnemonic devices and explained it by analogy. The wise one King Solomon had said, "To understand parable, eloquent speech, and the words of the wise and their riddles." Having decided to write this book on the main elements of the duties of the heart, I focused on selecting for discussion those duties which are most comprehensive and would include the rest. I chose the wholehearted acknowledgement of God's unity as the root principle and foundation. Then, when this is the thing, we will when we finish the introduction with the help of heaven, we will skip this, right? Because we said it's written down more detailed and more how to say and that it's not based on the Greek philosophy in the Zohar and the Arizal. Then I considered what is the other duties. However, the thing where he says, I considered with the other duties that we owe to God should follow the acknowledgement of His unity. In our discussion, I understood clearly that since the Creator is truly one and can be described by neither substance nor accident, our minds which cannot conceive of that which is neither substance nor accident. It's very interesting, actually. I one time asked, why does he speak in the from a teacher. I asked this one time from this one Rav. His name is Rav Goldberg from Adar Torah. Why they speak in the philosophical language and some other people speak in the language of Kabbalah, right? So it's very interesting. He said it's because one speaks, it's like two people speaking in a different language, right? One speaks in the one language and the other one speaks in another language. They're both trying to get the same stuff, trying to get the same things, right? However, either way, the Rabbi Nachman, I heard, he just says we just shouldn't get into we shouldn't really, how to say, dive into the unity, the unity of God, right? Like I told you about guys about how the one rabbi told us, first we gotta learn our religion, and then, we'll eventually know, with the help of heaven, we will know what's true and not true. But first we'll know what's not true by default of learning the truth. So first we have to learn our religion, and by default we learn the falsehood automatically, because that's just in nature. Because when we're doing the truth, the falsehood sometimes tries to pop up to us and tries to convince us, God forbid, to follow the falsehood, and that's not good, right? And we shouldn't do that. And that's the thing. That's our goal. However, with learning the truth, it's much easier to, how to say, run away from the bad, God forbid, with the help of heaven. And if it's hard, God forbid, I heard that if the Yetzer Hara comes, go to the Bet Midrash. If that doesn't work, we have to say Shema. If that doesn't work, we have to say we have to learn some Torah. That doesn't work, say Shema. And if that finally, all those things doesn't work, we have to remember the day that we're gonna go to the next world, right? And that's gonna give us. We have to be afraid. We shouldn't. We'll be judged if we don't repent on everything. So we have to repent. We have to say sorry for everything. God forbid if we did bad stuff. We have to really repent for our mistakes. Anyway, and I heard from the Frierdiker Rebbe. He said, if you light a candle, it can a little bit of light. A little bit of light can expose a lot of darkness. All right, so we gotta follow the light and run away. And by default, that will turn away dispel the darkness. Okay. I understood that clearly, since the Creator is truly one, and can be described neither by substance nor accident. Our minds, which cannot conceive of that which is neither substance nor accident, cannot possibly conceive of God and in His essence. We must therefore come to know Him and conceive of His existence through His creations. This is the great gate of reflection. I made this reflection the second major principle of the class of the duties of the heart, contemplating the sovereignty that rightfully belongs to the one true God and the service due to Him from His creatures. I established the acceptance of the servants. I established the acceptance of the service of God as the third major principle of the class of duties of the heart. I established the acceptance of the service of God as the third major principle of the class of duties of the heart. Then I realized what we owe the truly one, due to His singular rule over all, due to the fact that all help and all injury come only from Him, and with His consent we are all bound to place our trust in Him and submit to Him. And I made trust in God the fourth major principle of the class of the duties of the heart. So with the help of heaven, that actually finishes the second part of this book. Like I told you guys earlier, we had it was two sections of this book, but we made it into one. All right, so now it's like one book. Really interesting. With the help of heaven, we'll see you guys in the next couple of videos. And good job for everybody who's been following along. Other than that, excuse me. We'll see you guys in the next couple of videos. Nice job for everybody who's been reading along and taking notes over there, if you guys are taking notes. Other than that, we'll see you guys at the top of heaven next couple videos. Alright, see you guys. Peace.